distinctive sound of a guitar player who, more than any other, helped to popularize the electric guitar in this country. Hank, or Brian Marvin, had been playing for Cliff Richard as lead guitarist for 2 years before he and Bruce Walsh, Jet Harris and Tony Meehan, newly named the Shadows, had their first instrumental hit, Apache. It came together with the help of their producer, Norrie Paramore, in what now seems haphazard fashion at the end of Cliff's first American tour.
We came back, and almost immediately we were off on tour again of Britain. And on the tour was a guy called Jerry Lorden, who had had quite a bit of success as a songwriter and, more recently, success as a recording artist with songs he'd written himself. We struck up a friendship with Jerry, which we still have today, and we mentioned that we were looking for material, and we told him we didn't know whether to record another song, as that's basically what we wanted to do, or an instrumental. We could really do either. And he said, well, I don't know, it's up to you. But he said, if you're interested, I do have an instrumental I've written. No one's released it. It's an original piece if you'd like to hear it. And he got a ukulele, which used to tour with him, and he used to write playing chords on this ukulele. And he sang Apache on the bus, and we thought, this is a knockout. This is great. It was so original. It's so good, so totally different from everything that was happening. And we said, well, this is it, we want to record this. And we told Norrie we had this piece of music. We played it to him when we got back up the tour. And he thought it was marvellous. And Jerry did explain there was one little possible problem. That was it had already been recorded by Burt Weedon. But he didn't like Burt's version very much. He felt it was an uninspired sort of arrangement, very square, and that they hadn't even bothered releasing it. So he said, I don't think there's much problem of them releasing it now. Well, we recorded it, and at first Norrie liked it a lot, but felt that the A-side should be a thing called Quartermaster Stores, which he felt was more obviously commercial. But on playing it, we didn't agree with him. We felt Apache was so different, it had to be the A-side. So he played both tracks around and got a tremendous reaction for Apache, I'm glad to say, and decided to release it. So that's really how we recorded Apache and had our first hit.
Apache was the first of many hit records for the Shadows. There have been 32 top 50 records, and 5 of those were number ones. Now, although Hank Marvin had left Newcastle in the spring of 1958, searching for success in London, never in his wildest dreams can he have imagined that events would take the turns that they did. He'd started by playing banjo at the age of 15 and quickly formed a skiffle group, the Crescent City.
During this year, between the sort of 15th, 16th birthday period, one of the guys who joined us in the skiffle group was in fact a pianist, and he used to like blues and barrelhouse type piano, and that was the sort of way he used to play with us, which was quite good and different because most of the groups did not have pianos. And he happened to have in his possession a guitar, which he used to let me borrow, and I learned a few chords on the guitar, and he used to alternate between guitar and banjo during repertoire. And it was just a question of us really rehearsing. We used to find someone's house to rehearse in, that was our enjoyment, just playing. And then we'd try to find youth clubs or local, anything we could go along and offer our services free just to actually play. So I suppose I'd been playing the guitar for maybe 3-4 months before I actually was given a guitar as a present by my father.
It was 6 months after his 16th birthday that Hank left for London in company with Bruce Walsh. They'd both developed a taste for American rock and roll, courtesy of Scotty Moore, Chet Atkins, Bo Diddley, James Burton and Cliff Gallup, and spent some time hanging around the Two Eyes Coffee Bar and playing there in makeshift groups. Their first record was Teenage Love, but as 2 of the 5 Chesternuts, they failed dismally to make an impression. It was in October of 1958 that things really started to happen. Hank had already got himself a tour lined up as guitarist with the Most Brothers.
Johnny Foster came down the Two Eyes looking for a guitar player called Tony Sheridan, who he'd heard was a good player, because Cliff had got a tour booked, his first sort of big thing booked, as a supporting act of the Kalin Twins, commencing October the 5th at Hanley Victoria Hall. And Johnny came to the Two Eyes on the afternoon, hoping to see Tony Sheridan, who was not there. I was down there, by chance, with a guy called Rick Richards, who in fact was a country and western singer. He knew Johnny vaguely. I think he'd met Cliff a couple of times. He knew John. And they got talking, and John told him why he was there. And he said, well, have you heard this guy play? He said, who? He said, Hank. He said, no. He said, he listened to Tony Sheridan. He said, well, he's better than Tony Sheridan. He said, in fact, which was true, he said he taught Tony Sheridan to play, because when I came to the Two Eyes, Tony was just literally playing 3 chords, and all the rock and roll solos I'd pinched off the records, he wanted to know. I showed him how to do it. But he was a very quick learner. Within a few months, he was playing really well. He used to practice for hours every day, getting off all the rock and roll solos, and he really was quite good. Anyway, Rick, maybe he didn't like Tony. He said, he's better than Tony, have a listen to him. And he came and said, get your guitar, we'll go and do a few songs downstairs. Oh, no, I was all embarrassed, you know. So he persuaded me. We went downstairs, got the gear out, which was down there because we were playing that night, and we ran through a few songs. And Johnny seemed fairly impressed by it, and he said, well, that sounds good to me. He said, would you like to do this tour with Cliff? And as I was already doing it with the Most Brothers, which is good, that meant I was playing for 2 people on the tour, which I thought was quite good money. Yes, this is great. And I asked him what the band was. He said, well, there's the drummer, we've got a bass player, we've got you, and we need another guitarist. So I recommended Bruce. He said, well, bring him along then. And we arranged a meeting place on such and such afternoon where we'd meet John and Cliff, and then we'd all take the bus to Cliff's family home in Cheshunt, and we'd rehearse, which is what we did.
Working with Cliff on tour quickly helped to establish a great relationship, and within weeks, Hank was in the studio with Cliff and Norrie Paramore, working on Cliff's next single, Livin' Lovin' Doll.
They drive me crazy when we're bobbing at the heart. Excuse me, time I have to flirt it flop. The frantic kiss, you drive me right up the wall. Oh, 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 you live in love and down. Treat me mean and nasty, but come when I call. Oh, 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 you live in love and down. Well, all of a sudden, when you lift on me out, the rigor I thought no one loves all about. I need you summer when it's springtime I fall. Oh, 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 you live in love and down. Treat me mean and nasty, but come when I call. Oh, 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 you live in love and down. doll, well, living, loving doll. Living, loving doll. I want you all the time. I have to kiss you, can't resist you. Oh, oh, you living, loving doll, yeah. You drive me crazy when we're bopping at the house. Just give me time, my heart to flippity flop. The Friday kiss, you drive me right off the wall. Oh, 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 you living, loving doll. Take me, need a nap, even call, oh, when I call. Oh, 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 you living, loving doll. All of a sudden, when you lift on me, I love the rig is roughed up, what love's all about. I need you summer with the springtime of fall. Oh, 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 you living, loving doll. Take me, need a nap, even call, oh, when I call. Oh, 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 you living, loving doll. Well, hey, living, loving doll. All the time I have to kiss you, can't resist you. Oh, 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 you living, loving doll. Well, hey, living, loving doll. Oh, living, loving doll. I want you all the time I have to kiss you, can't resist you. Oh, oh, you living, loving doll.
This session, like many first ones, had not been altogether comfortable. For although Hank had been invited to turn up for the session, Norrie Paramore had, for safety's sake, also called the man who played lead guitar on Cliff's first two singles, Ernie Shear.
What happened was that we did a number called Livin' Lovin' Doll, which is another Ian Samwell song. Norrie suggested that I virtually played rhythm, really like two rhythm guitars, and Ernie did all this lead work, you see. And Cliff wasn't very happy about that because he had a point that he felt that Ernie wasn't really into rock and roll music, and that whilst Move It was just right, High Class Baby he felt didn't quite happen guitar-wise, and he had the feeling that he tended to do the same sort of thing every time on a rock and roll record. You know, there wasn't really any variety. Anyway, Norrie wanted him to play, so we came along. He played a few fills in the solo, and it really was Move It and High Class Baby revisited, da 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 da, and that was it, you know. And Cliff wasn't very happy, and so he said to Norrie, "I'd like Hank to play lead guitar on this, really." And Norrie said, "Well, you know." So Cliff says, "Look, well, why don't we do one of each, see how it works?" So I says, "All right." So we did that. Cliff said to me after we did mine, he said, "I sang a lot better on this one." And as it happens, I think it was a better track anyway, because Ernie, who's a fine guitar player, just, as I say, played the same sort of solo as he did on High Class Baby again. You could have just taken one out and dubbed it in. So I think mine was a bit more original on it and had a different sort of sound. And Cliff was much happier with it. And Norrie said, "Well, that's the best overall performance. We'll take that one." And after that session, when we did probably 3 numbers on that session, or 4, perhaps 4, that was the last time Norrie ever booked any other musicians. Well, that was our first session, really. So after that, it was just the Drifters, as we were called then. It's Bruce, Jet, Tony and myself.
That particular nucleus, first known as the Drifters and later the Shadows, stayed together until October 1961, recording 17 top 50 singles with Cliff. The recording sessions, although highly disciplined where time factors were concerned, provided every opportunity within a framework to develop original solo lines.
I guess if we'd have done someone else's song on stage, I may have copied the solo off the record out of my admiration for the original guitar player. But when we did original material, I tried to be original, and it was usually spontaneous in the studio. In those days, obviously, everything was recorded more or less live. Cliff sang as we played, and that was it. In the end, if the producer, if Norrie promised, that was a great take, come and listen, that was your record, we'd done it. And so it had a great feel of spontaneity, plenty of nerves and everything. So in those cases, with original material, I would try to play something original. I'm sure it was heavily influenced by those that I admired, though.
Got myself a crying, talking, sleeping, walking, living doll. Got to do my best to please her just 'cause she's a living doll. Got a roving eye and that is why she satisfies my soul. Got the one and only walking, talking, living doll. Well, take a look at her hair, it's real, and if you don't believe what I say, just feel. Gonna lock her up in a trunk, so no big hunk can steal her away from me. Got myself a crying, talking, sleeping, walking, living doll. Got to do my best to please her, just 'cause she's a living doll. Got a roving eye, and that is why she satisfies my soul. Got the one and only walking, talking, living doll.
Arrived at his guitar and style by a series of happy accidents. His idol, James Burton, played a Fender guitar, so Hank had to have one. How was he to know that Burton played a Telecaster?
It's marvellous, isn't it, the way things happen by mistake in life and often turn out for the best. We were thinking about getting a better guitar. I say we because I talked about this with Cliff, and I was using this Antoria, which had an interesting sound, but it was bloomin' awful to play. But we thought that the sound on the Ricky Nelson records was a knockout sound, the James Burton sound, really good. If we could achieve something like that, this is what we're looking for, get this American rock and roll sound. And we'd heard that he played a Fender. So Cliff's management rode off to the Fender factory in the States and asked for a brochure, which they duly sent. And we pored over this brochure. The reason we had to do this, by the way, for people who don't know about this, is at that time period, there was no way of getting a new American instrument in Britain. There was some kind of an import ban, and the only way you could get one was either by sending direct to the States for one, or have a friend who's a traveller on a ship bring one back from the States. So we got the brochure, poured through it, and we've discovered the most expensive Fender guitar was a Stratocaster with bird's eye maple neck, tremolo arm and gold-plated hardware, and we thought, this must be the one James Burton uses. So we ordered it. It probably cost about £120, I think, cheap by today's standards. Cliff, in fact, was going to buy the guitar for me to use because I couldn't afford it, so he had all the information sent off with a check or whatever they had to send, and it arrived very soon after in this magnificent tweed flat case with this lovely plush red lining and this magnificent guitar lying there. It looked a real treat. It was flamingo pink, this lovely bird's eye maple fingerboard and neck, and of course all the gold-plated hardware looked fantastic. I mean, it just looked good. You didn't have to play it, you know, we just had to hang around the neck and the audience would be absolutely, totally impressed. And that was marvellous. And using the, I'd already had an idea of what the tremolo arms would do, because on a thing called Living Doll, which was Cliff's first #1 hit, I borrowed a guitar from a guy called Tony Harvey, who later played with Johnny Halliday in France for quite a long while. This guitar was a copy of, I think, a Gretsch White Falcon, big semi-acoustic, well, F-hold cello guitar. And the strings went onto a tailpiece, which means they pass, for the listeners who don't know, passes over the bridge, and it's fastened at the end of the guitar, end of the body, on a little sort of fishtail-looking piece of metalwork. And on this guitar, if you pressed that tailpiece, it acted like a tremolo arm. In fact, if you listen to Living Doll, that's what I use on that instead of a tremolo arm. And of course, having realised the value of being able to wobble your strings, I was overjoyed with this tremolo arm business, because I started off immediately developing a technique whereby I could wobble this tremolo arm at all possible opportunities.
After the success of Apache in the summer of 1960, Apaches, or variations of them, came flooding into the Shadows office. In November of that year, they had a double hit with Man of Mystery and The Stranger, and then in early 1961, they came up with their own hit, FBI.
When we wrote it, and we did write it, despite what it says on the label, it goes dunk-da-dunk-da-dunk-da-da. That was the basic feel from the guitar, the rhythm guitar, through the music. And that's what Bruce played. In fact, I rather liked FBI because it got away from the acoustic sound we've been having and that sort of rhythm guitar approach to a much more open spacious sounding feel. Everything was quite clear, your drums, bass, and that quite open guitar sound. Very nice.
FBI, another huge hit for the Shadows. It was clear that for some unexplained reason, instrumental records were capturing the imagination of record buyers. New dimensions were also being added to guitar sounds by the use of gimmicks such as echo boxes.
I was first introduced to the echo box through Joe Brown, a fellow guitarist. He was doing one of these Jack Good television shows in the actually it was 59, I was going to say early 60s, it was 59. We were appearing in Liverpool and we drove across to Manchester where Jack was doing this series because Gene Vincent was on the show and he was one of our rock and roll heroes and we wanted to meet him, which we did, had a short chat with him. So after the thrill of that, Joe took me to one side and said, what do you think of this, mate, in his own inimitable way? Yeah, mate, or words to that effect. So I looked at this little box with a few knobs on the front, and he informed me it was an echo box, and he gave me his guitar, his Gibson, and said, play a few notes. And there was a really great echo sound. I couldn't believe this was fantastic. And I was absolutely amazed at the echo effects that we could achieve on this box. For instance, the early rock and roll echo, that short tape echo people use, is still used today to get a rock and roll effect. You could get all of that. Anyway, following that experience, when we returned to London, I went to the Vox people who were importing this echo box and bought one and started to use it and just thought it was fantastic. And on one of Cliff's albums in the summer of 59, I believe, or early 60s, we used it on that album. And then, of course, I'm not sure if we used it on Saturday Dance or not, but definitely on Apache. By then, that sound had happened, accidentally really. The combination of the Fender Strat sound, the tremolo arm, the Vox amplifier, which I had at the time, and the echo box, and that sound that people either love or hate had arrived, and that was it.
The Shadows were in summer season in Blackpool when their next #1 record was released. And that was Kon-Tiki.
Kon-Tiki was written by the man who wrote Man of Mystery, Michael Carr, who also wrote South of the Border. And Kon-Tiki was sent in. Funnily enough, I believe, I might be wrong on this, but someone told me the demo we were given was Joe was actually playing it, Joe Brown. We liked it. As soon as we heard it, we thought, this is good. It's got something. And we recorded it with a single in mind and released it and had another #1 with it.
Kon-Tiki represented the Shadows' fifth hit single as a separate entity. As support to Cliff, they'd notched up another 16 hits by that time. So how did they see themselves?
I just felt that we were very lucky, really, to have had the breaks we had. I mean, I appreciated that we obviously had a sound that was very appealing, otherwise people wouldn't buy the record. We happened to be making the right records, one, but we also had a sound which had a very broad appeal, and it was stimulating a lot of copyists or groups that were certainly heavily influenced by. So, I mean, one had to be realistic about that. You could see all that, and that was very flattering, made you feel good. But I still recognised my limitations as a guitar player. I wasn't as good as I'd like to have been, nowhere near as good as I'd like to have been, but I didn't have the discipline to do much about it. You know, things were going along pretty well. We were writing a lot of successful songs, and there were only so many hours in a day, you know, travelling, writing, recording. There wasn't a lot of time left, actually, to do what I should have been doing, which was practice.
There's no doubt that Cliff and the Shads were a remarkable team. Although they were enjoying great success on their own, their relationship with Cliff continued to flourish as strongly as ever.
We used to be together a lot of the time, and we used to look upon ourselves as a group, a five-man group, really. Yes, we knew that Cliff was a solo star. He was a big name, big name, and a big record-selling artist. But at the same time, we worked together very closely and socially, and we just felt that we were like a group. And so the way Cliff looked at it, it was Cliff and the Shads he used to see us all as. And so it wasn't any great bad feeling that we had to go on. All right, we did our own spot and it went great, then we have to go on again and play with Cliff. It was tiring on the 2 shows a night, but it's something we enjoyed doing. And it carried on a relationship which was important, I think, to both of us at the time, and which the fans thought a lot of. They still do today. They look back on that and also, when are you going to get back together and do this, that and the other? It was a bit like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and I'm not going to tell you who is Ginger Rogers, or Horses and Carts. You know, you go together.
Song to be sung, and the best time is to sing it while we're young. Once in every lifetime comes a love like this. Oh, I need you, you need me. Oh, my darling, can't you see? Young dreams should be dreamed together. And a young heart shouldn't be afraid. And someday, when the years have flown, darling, then we'll teach the young ones of our. Once in every lifetime comes a love like this. Oh, I need you and you need me. Oh, my darling, can't you see? Young dreams should be dreams together. And a young heart shouldn't be afraid. And some day, while the years have flown, darling, then we'll teach
problems, of course, added to that list of things which occupied their time to the exclusion of things like practicing.
The practice came playing on stage, and the rehearsals for new numbers to record and to include in stage shows, and that, I think that is why I didn't actually make a great amount of progress as a musician for quite a long period of time, because of the playing a lot of the same music over and over again and not practicing. In the environment that many of the musicians who came up in the 60s were in, which was these clubs when they'd play 2-hour sets of, like, particularly there were the early rhythm and blues bands, and there was a lot of improvising. That was a tremendous grounding for improving. But the sort of things we were doing was fairly limited, really. You know, you can't improvise on Apache. If you do, the audience will lynch you. Or FBI, you know, you've got to do pretty much as the record. All right, in some of Cliff's numbers, I could, to a degree, change the solos, but even then I had to be careful, because if it was too different from their record, people would moan about it, write letters and say, well, you know, why is you changed this? It was a great song on the record. What's wrong with that? Why change it? You know, we came along to hear this, that, and so you've got to be ever so careful, otherwise you alienate the public, and they're the ones what pay the rent.
In early 1962, the Shadows released another #1 single, perhaps their best. It was Wonderful Land.
Well, it was another Jerry Lorden composition, and one which again we thought very highly of. It was different, unusually melodic. When I say unusually, I don't mean to say that things were not melodic at the time. There was a lot of melodies around, but the melody was an unusual one, unusual sort of chord sequence. The intervals were different. We arranged it, we recorded it, and it was put in the can. We felt this was a potential single, but was there something missing? We thought about it, then Norrie thought, well, what about me trying to overdub some strings? He said, such a beautiful melody, it may need the importance of strings, give it extra. So he said, why not? Give it a whirl. He did, and we heard it and thought, oh, that's beautiful, the French horns and the strings. It really sounded very wonderful. And we entitled it Wonderful Land because Jerry didn't have a title for it. And it sounded good, and we thought we'd take a chance and release it. And it was a good chance we took, because it was #1 for 10 weeks, 9 or 10 weeks. It was such a great piece of music. I still love it today.
Wonderful Land. One of the techniques used on that particular solo to make it distinctive was a system of damping or deadening strings.
It wasn't anything peculiar to me. It is a technique which guitar players have used. Les Paul's used it on his old records. You hear it, country players often use it when they're damping the bass strings with the heel of their hand, of the palm of their hand, on the 3 lower strings, and then picking the higher strings open. They get that damped bass effect. And it's a nice effect sometimes. It's just another way of playing it. Instead of having the ringing open string, you damp the string so you get a muffled effect, and it stops the string fairly short. And on that little piece of melody, I just felt that using the echo, very cleverly, or so I thought at the time, with the damped effect, it got the echo to give a nice effect behind the initial note of the guitar.
It was obvious by now that Hank and the Shadows were at least trying to introduce variety into their performance. And it was a desire to pursue this policy which led to their next release, Guitar Tango.
This was a piece of music sent to us from France, and it had been recorded by a couple of artists as an LP track, but we just thought it had something. So we wanted to record it, and then when we had recorded it, using the Spanish guitar, we seemed to think it had something. In fact, we recorded that twice. We recorded it first with Jet Harris, and it wasn't very good. Not to do with Jet, just the arrangement, the routine of it. And we re-recorded it with Licorice, Brian Locking, with a different routine, and we felt that was the better version, a more commercial routine. You know, was not quite the right routine. And that's the one that was released as the single, and we had the hit with. I still think it's a nice piece of music. We were a little bit anxious about the outcome of that, because obviously it wasn't the accepted Shadows sound, it wasn't my normal electric guitar sound. I mean, really, who knew it was the Shadows if you heard it for the first time? But I think it was a good piece of music, and it sold very well.
A different sound indeed. Acoustic Shadows from summer 1962 and Guitar Tango. This, remember, was pre-Beatles, and Cliff and the Shadows were falling comfortably into summer season and leisurely tours. The arrival of the Beatles was to make a profound impact.
Interestingly, in the first year of so-called Beatlemania, which was 1963, that's when we enjoyed one of our biggest record-selling years. It was, running concurrently with the success of the Beatles. We had Dance On, Foot Tapper, Atlantis, Shindig, Theme for Young Lovers. 2 number ones, number 2 and 2 top 10s that year, you know. So it was a big year record-wise for us. But clearly the Beatles were such an enormous... This, you see, was what everyone was waiting for. Something, no one knew in what form it would take, of course. But the music scene, after the early rock days, when it had gone to the more sweeter things, melody with a beat and so on, beat music, as people called it, it was getting too smooth, I think. And that included us and Cliff. I think we were starting to get too much the all-round entertainers. And along came a group who were very raw, but writing great songs and had a raucous sound. But even listening to their songs, there were good melodies, you see, this is interesting. But perhaps they got, with the good melodies, a lot of rawness that we'd ironed out, you see. We'd now got the experience and the ability to iron out that rawness. They still had it. I think even if the Beatles hadn't come along, to be honest, I think that we would have gradually lost ground on single record sales. It had to happen. I just couldn't see an instrumental group continuing year after year after year, having the big hits we were having. I couldn't see it.
Let's pass on Dance On, Atlantis, Shindig and Theme for Young Lovers. Here's Foot Tapper. Foot Tapper, originally written by Hank Marvin and Bruce Welsh for Jacques Tati and then used in the film Summer Holiday, was the Shadows' last #1 record, but was far from being their last hit. Two of the more unusual singles to follow were The Rise and Fall of Flingle Bunt and Rhythm and Greens.
They were both made up in the studios, really. The Rise and Fall of Flingle Bunt came up because of that opening riff that happened in the studio. And I just suggested we make a 12-bar type instrumental out of it. Again, the time was right for that sort of instrumental because the rhythm and blues music with the Rolling Stones, the pre-things, had become popular in '64. So again, people were attuned to that 12-bar type, more heavy music. And we felt it had a good chance as a single. We wrote the music. Norrie said, "This is a great track. I think it's got potential as a single." It was done all in the one evening, you know, blah blah, from the concept of it to recording it, and that's it. To being titled, played around to a couple of people who thought it was great. Yes, we think this is a single, released, and we had a single hit. Rhythm and Greens came about slightly differently in that we were asked to do a half-hour comedy film of life on the beaches of Britain with about 4 or 5 pieces of music, each supposed to be representing a period in history. So we wrote those pieces and recorded them, and this idea we had for I think the last piece, which was life in the future, when people would be rocking on the beaches with their black leather kilts on and dark glasses and all manner of weird things, you know, amplifiers with and antennae on the top. We thought we'd do a sort of send-up of some of the rhythm and blues type stuff, with this "yeah baby ooh yeah" sort of shout, keep in wow and all this stuff. And what we did was we just established that what we would do, we just start and we just play. It was total improvisation, with "yeah baby ooh ah" thrown in now and again, and a tacit certain points, a drum break, and it was just a complete improvisation done in like one take, and that is it. And that was the atmosphere we wanted to create and capture. And we thought it might stand a chance of a bit of success with the rhythm and blues popularity, and because it was a bit of a novelty record, it was like a send-up really, and it was a top 20 hit. You know, it wasn't as big as we'd liked it to have been, but let's face it, there was no melody.
Shadows were to have 9 more hits over the next 4 years, but none of them recaptured the success of the early 60s. And although the personnel had changed a little over the years, Hank and Bruce were still there. For them, it had been a non-stop decade.
We were getting to a period where we'd all had enough of each other. We'd done such a lot of work together, we'd been together so much socially, that we felt the time had come to each of us go out in different directions musically, perhaps, and be refreshed. Bruce was the first one really to make that decision. He felt he'd had enough and he couldn't really carry on. The other 3, Brian, John Russell and myself, thought for a while we might just carry on as a 3-piece and see how we go. And then after about 2 or 3 we thought, no, it's not going to work. Let's own up. We should be free of each other for a while. Let's go and do it. And that was it. And of course, we no longer existed as a group, the Shadows, and so clearly we couldn't back Cliff, so that's when we stopped working with Cliff.
In the early 70s, Hank worked as a member of the Marvin, Walsh and Farrah team. And in 1973, those 3, with the addition of Brian Bennett, came up with the album Rockin' with Curly Leads. It was in 1975 that the Shadows were pulled together again to represent Britain in the Eurovision Song Contest. They achieved 2nd place and a top 20 hit in Britain with the vocally oriented Let Me Be the One. And in 1977, rode the crest of another wave with the triumphant release of their early material in the shape of 20 Golden Greats.
When we were approached by the record company to do it, we wondered really if they knew what they were doing, but they just had a big success with the Beach Boys one. I think it was the first one they did. And they didn't have the hits we had here in their career. And they'd done market research, and they said that the response was fantastic, and they said they had no doubt about it, they'd have a #1 hit album with it, without a doubt. So we said, well, if you feel this strongly about it, they put up the money for the TV promotion, then who are we to argue? But even when they said that, we were still very pleasantly surprised when it did get to #1 and stayed there for 6 weeks. And I think did 1.25 million albums here, so that was marvellous. It was a great thrill.
In December 1978, the Shadows were back in the singles chart again with another instrumental record, their version of Don't Cry For Me, Argentina.
Argentina was a piece of music that was, for us, purely a stage number. And we did it on a tour 3 years ago, whenever it was, and the response was absolutely fantastic from the audiences, and that's why we recorded it, purely as a single. We really didn't think it stood any chance of being a hit as a single. It didn't seem right, It had already been a monster hit by Julie Covington as the original song. But yet the response had been so good, we thought, well, perhaps there's something in it that we're not seeing, although we think it's a lovely piece of music. And we couldn't really believe it when it was a hit.
Since the success of Argentina in 1978, the Shadows have had 3 other top 50 successes. They're by no means a spent force. But it's clear that Hank and the Shadows are in no danger of eclipsing their early 60s success. Ultimately, what is perhaps more important is their legacy to pop and rock music in this country.
I think if anyone says they've been influenced and they've reached any standard of proficiency because you were the prime source of motivation in the first place, that gives me a pleasurable feeling, whether it's a famous name or not. But I think it's pleasing when anyone turns around and says that you're the reason I started playing the guitar. It's when they say, you were so bad, I thought, I've got to be able to do better than that. It really...